I didn't want your unique and biological connection to Phoebe and Jacob to get in the way of your growing relationship and your affections for Annika.
Yeah, I mean, we were only a couple of years in at that point.
Yeah, I felt really protective of Annika and concerned for her. There was a lot going on.
I bet.
And I really didn't want her to feel like she was less than or left out or treated differently. I was worried about you showing favoritism towards the other kids and treating her differently.
That's a totally legitimate fear.
Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your stepfamily from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
Understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork.
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of stepfamily life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 83 of the Blended Family Coaching Show. We are always so glad to be here with you every single week, trying to bring value and maybe a little bit of fun along the way as well. Hey, we have had an influx of ratings and reviews coming in the last few weeks. Thank you so much. And we so appreciate your feedback and the encouragement that it brings. And more importantly, it brings some hope and some help to other couples who are struggling just like you. And if you haven't left a rating or a review yet, that really helps us kind of get known more in the podcast world, I guess, is what you might call it. And we would really appreciate you helping us with that. Another thing you might consider doing is actually sharing us out to your social media platform. Some of the research around blended family statistics say that 40% of families in the U.S. and Canada are possibly blended families.
I think it's even higher than that.
Well, that's some of the statistics, but there's some question about how those statistics were gathered. And you're right, it's probably bigger. That means, here's what that means. On your social media platform, potentially 4 out of 10 coupled people that you know might be in a blended family, and they could probably use some help. So share it out there on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or wherever you are, and just say what it's doing for you. And maybe other people will join you in listening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get some value from
That's
that.
enough of my infomercial for today. We want to dive into what can be a really challenging topic sometimes in blended families, and it's all around favoritism.
Yeah, this is tough. And, just the word favoritism reminds me of when we were having our first mutual child together, honey. And, at that point, we had been married a couple of years, and you had a pretty good relationship with my daughter, Annika, pretty well established. And she was 7.5 years old when our daughter, Phoebe, was born. And I remember I've never seen a dad so proud. You were so proud of Phoebe, and everywhere we went, you whipped her out of her carrier and showed her off, and you were just so thrilled.
I was pretty excited.
You were over the moon. It was cute. And I enjoyed the cuteness of that, but I also had some kind of nagging concerns at the time. I found myself really wondering how Annika was perceiving that and how she was feeling as you kind of showed Phoebe off to everyone. And even sometimes you'd go up to perfect strangers and be like, hey, look at
my baby.
Yeah, isn't she gorgeous?
Yeah, I did that sometimes.
Yeah. And so I wondered what that was doing inside of Annika. She was kind of watching you, delighting in this way over every little detail of Phoebe. And I wondered if she was feeling displaced or if she was feeling jealous. Did she feel like she had to compete for your love and your attention? And then only 17 months later, our son Jacob was born.
You are amazing, honey. 17 months later. Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
That was quite a couple of years.
Yeah, it was. But, I wondered, how would our 2 hours baby, as they're sometimes called, impact Annika and her relationship with you or with me for that matter, right?
Yep.
And incidentally, her dad in the other home also had 3 children right around the same time. So she got bombarded with 5 half siblings in literally
couple of years,
2.5 year span.
Yep.
So it definitely impacted her. And I did. I worried about favoritism creeping into our lives. And I wondered where that would lead our family and how that would impact Annika.
I think that's a totally legitimate fear. And you know what? Favoritism, this word favoritism, is just kind of a yucky word in any family.
Yeah.
We don't like that word. But the reality is that it's something that can show up in some really unexpected and even unnoticeable ways.
Definitely.
At times, right? And it's an area that we have to get really honest about, and we have to learn how to communicate it around it well as a couple and really be able to share what's going on.
Yeah, communication, you said it. That's the key here. Don't pretend.
Yeah.
You've got to get honest. After both of our mutual kids arrived, Mike, you honestly shared with me that you had some conflicting emotions.
Yeah. I mean, I had really grown to love Annika. I mean, I was enjoying my relationship with Annika, but once the 2 littles came along, I was thinking, gosh, this is different.
Right.
And I have this different love for Phoebe and Jacob. And it's not more or less or better or worse. It's just different. Yeah. And I had to find ways to share that with you. That was actually really hard to share.
Yeah. And, and I understood this. I mean, you had a biological connection to Phoebe and Jacob that would never exist between you and Annika. That's just the reality of blended family life. But it also hurt my heart a little bit to hear you say that you loved the other kids differently.
Yeah.
And I didn't want your unique and biological connection to Phoebe and Jacob to get in the way of your growing relationship and your affections for Annika.
Yeah, I mean, we were only a couple of years in at that point.
Yeah, I felt really protective of Annika and concerned for her. There was a lot going on.
I bet.
And I really didn't want her to feel like she was less than or left out or treated differently. I was worried about you showing favoritism towards the other kids and treating her differently.
That's a totally legitimate fear.
Yeah. So this was a touchy topic for us. But the more we were able to communicate about it and really talk about the dynamics and the realities that were going on for us and express our feelings and our fears, the more we did that, the easier it became.
True.
Yeah. It helped to really open our eyes. So continual communication really helped us to make better decisions when those awkward situations came along around favoritism. And it wasn't always easy, but it was really worth the effort.
We're so excited to let you know about something brand new we've created just for you.
We've realized that with so many episodes available here on the show, it might feel a bit overwhelming to find the topics that matter most to you. That's why we've created a simple tool for you to receive a personalized playlist focused on your current struggle or your biggest challenge.
That's right. It's called the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz. You'll answer just a few questions, and based on your responses, we'll email you a curated custom playlist of episodes that are specific to you.
This simple quiz will direct you to the most impactful episodes that pertain to you personally and keep you on track in your journey of discovery, learning, and growth. So, scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes for this episode and click the link to take the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz today.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion.
Yeah, and every family is different. Every family has their own unique circumstances. Ours happened to be starting out as a fairly simple stepfamily with only one child in the mix. And then we had 2 mutual kids.
Right.
And we've heard that story multiple times, right? Other stepfamilies are a complex step family where they
Right.
both partners bring kids
in.
and that same kind of thing often can exist.
Definitely.
Where there's a feeling of, oh, are you going to favor your kids more than my kids? And it can kind of build a biological divide between the family and be really challenging.
Yeah, you can have the same concerns that I had for Annika. Are my kids going to feel less than or left out or treated differently?
Yeah. And you said a word earlier that where it moves you kind of in protective mode.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And then that creates some challenges between us as a couple. And we have to work through that. There's all kinds of different ways that blended families come together and the ways that not only that they're formed, but the ways that they grow. Sometimes complex blended families where both partners brought the kids, then they have mutual kids. And that adds a whole other element to all of it. And then this whole favoritism thing can get really interesting. It can get really challenging.
And tricky.
It can be very tricky. There's a couple of danger zones when it comes to favoritism. And one of those danger zones is what we're talking about right now. That's those unique dynamics.
Yeah, when we don't understand our uniqueness and how that impacts all the relationships.
Yeah.
I think for Ron Deal, step family expert Ron Deal and his team identified 67 possible combinations of step family dynamics. And it's just crazy.
It is, yeah. So these unique dynamics are really a big danger zone when it comes to favoritism. But then also, it's the heartstrings that are sometimes attached to those unique dynamics that can be very interesting. And what matters most around favoritism that we have to keep in mind, we're going to talk about this again in a little bit, is that it's really about the perception that the kids have more so often than what the adults intend to do. Yeah. So I've got a bit of a kind of a unique dynamic story to tell you that I grew up in, and we'll talk a little bit about that here for a moment, and then we're going to get really practical here in just a few minutes. If you've listened to the show for any length of time, you might already know that I was born into blended family dynamics. I've never not lived in a blended family. And the uniqueness about my blended family, especially the early stages, was that, when I was 1 year old, my mom passed away. And her parents, my grandparents on my bio mom's side, took my siblings and I into their house, and my dad as well, so their son-in-law. And we lived there for many years until I was about 7, I believe. And during that time, I grew very close to my grandparents.
Yeah, because you were just an infant when your mom passed away.
Exactly. And so years later, we're kind of having a little family gathering with my siblings and even a couple of cousins. And I remember part of the conversation, somebody was like, looked at me and said, "Oh, well, you were the favorite. Nana and Papa's favorite." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And one of my cousins piped in and was like, "Oh, yeah, you were totally the favorite."
So you were Nana's favorite child.
It wasn't just Nana. It was Nana and Papa, both of them. Yeah. In their perception, my cousins and my siblings, their perception was that my grandparents favored me. And, in many ways, you might be thinking, well, what does that matter about grandparents? But in many ways, in my unique dynamics, because later when my dad remarried, I moved back and forth between my grandparents and my parents' home. It was very much like a divorce situation, because there was also tension between those households.
And they were your other home. They were your other visitation.
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting as we were preparing for this particular podcast, I called up my brother. He's 9 years older than me. And I was like, hey, there's been a couple times where we've had this conversation of, when it comes to Nana and Papa, I was the favorite. Can you tell me more about that? Like, why was that the case? Yeah. And he said, well, part of it was that you simply were the baby. Yeah. And when mom passed away, you were only one. And now here's her mom who, lost her baby, her daughter, and now has her daughter's baby. And of course, she's going to pay very close attention to that baby and draw a close bond,
and just because of your age, you were high need.
Exactly, exactly. And so that was one of the circumstances that makes sense to a lot of people. And yet, years later, it left the rest of the siblings feeling as though there was a favored child.
Yeah, and even the cousins.
Yeah, exactly. That lived out of state, by the way. They didn't even live near us. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting that he said, and this one I think can impact a lot of families, even first families, I think this can impact. My grandpa was a woodworker. He had a big shop. And when I was little, I spent a ton of time in Papa's shop. And I enjoyed it. I liked the tools. I liked the environment. I liked building stuff. I was a part of that world with him. And of course, Papa drew really close to me through that time. Well, my brother, he didn't really like it that much. He didn't spend that much time. My sister didn't spend that much time down there either. It wasn't that big of a deal. And because there was this shared interest then between me and Papa, it created a closeness that didn't exist in those other relationships. Now, I share that story. I tell all of that because it's a unique circumstance, like those 67 different ways that families blend that Ron talks about. But the important piece is these two danger zones when it comes to favoritism, is that there's some unique dynamics going on. And when we fail to examine them, we might develop a blind spot. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And the other thing is with all of those unique dynamics comes heartstrings. Yeah. And we have to pay attention to those. Yeah. And we have to really actually dive in and kind of go, oh yeah, what are the kids experiencing as a result of these unique dynamics and the heartstrings that come with them?
We have to understand how our behavior is impacting the kids' perception of their standing in our hearts.
Yes. And I think this is, I don't know if there's any research out there around this, but this is just what I think. I think that bio families, first families, are also susceptible to this whole thing. But I think blended family dynamics creates an amplifier for it. Yeah. And it makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, there's more areas to trip over it.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. It's not that uncommon for parents to gravitate more easily toward one particular child because of all the different dynamics or the interests and all that we just talked about.
Or the personality type.
Yeah, but in a blended family, all these different developing relationships can get really complicated by the biological connections and the various visitation schedules that impact how much time we get to spend in multiple households. It's the temperament of the different children. It's the kids' history or the hurts or the challenges that they've experienced. All of that impacts our hearts as parents. And honestly, the list can go on and on and on. Yeah. And sometimes I'm going to jump into a little bit of a blended family controversial topic here. But sometimes step couples, they're going to want to cover some of that up by just simply saying, well, there's no steps here. We're just family.
Yeah, we hear that all the time.
And I get the intention behind it. And I think it's really a good intention to try and say, hey, let's get rid of the step label and just call it family, trying to be very non-biased. But that doesn't change the emotional reality for the people who are living it, especially for the kids.
Yeah, you can't expect a child to treat a step sibling the same as they treat a bio sibling who they've known their whole life and have this history and connection with. It's just not a reality.
Right. And, we talked earlier about like my love for Annika and as compared to my love for Phoebe and Jacob. And that the key is it's not about better or worse. It's just about being different. And if we're wise in the way we navigate those differences, then we can actually avoid most of the problems that get created by this. And it's actually facing the differences that helps us move forward, not trying to get rid of the differences.
Yeah, or cover it up or pretend it's not a deal when it is a deal.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, we really can't expect love to just magically happen in all these different relationships of blended family life. It takes time for those connections to grow. You may love your spouse madly and therefore also love their children because they're part of your spouse. So that extension of love.
Sure.
But that doesn't guarantee that genuine affection for a stepchild is just going to automatically become a reality for step-parents.
Yeah, especially when the heat's on and they're being a brat or, they're acting in ways that you would rather they didn't act. Yeah.
There really is no such thing as instant love when it comes to blended families. The truth is showing favor is different than love. Love is an emotion that grows over time.
Yep.
But showing favor is a behavior that we choose.
Yeah. Either intentionally or unintentionally.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get really practical here. How does this play out in our daily lives when we're juggling responsibilities and disciplining and prioritizing our time? And let's start by just going back to that term I used a little earlier, and that's these favoritism blind spots. Blind spots are areas where we may not intend to send a favoritism message. Right. Like Nana and Papa would have never wanted us kids and cousins to have this feeling that there was any kind of favoritism at all. In fact, in my conversation the other day with my brother, he even said, yeah, totally. They would never have wanted that. But the reality was that it came up because it was a blind spot for Nana and Papa.
Everyone felt it.
And it's not always about what the parents or grandparents or whoever's involved is trying to do, but it's about the perception of the kids.
What they see.
That's right. So let's talk about some areas where blind spots can be most noticeable by kids and often missed by the adults.
Yeah.
And in all 4 of these areas we're going to talk about, our goal is to be equitable, not necessarily equal. Okay? So we want to show up in an equitable way, not necessarily equal. We have this same dynamic with our mutual kids, right? Our 2 mutual kids are dramatically different in personality type. And so what works for one when it comes to things like parenting or discipline or, even reward or any of that, it's very different than what the other one does. And we've fallen into this equity versus equal trap lots of times over the years because they're so close in age. They're 17 months apart. And so we've sometimes felt like we have to do everything exactly the same for both kids. But over time, what's actually been equitable and works better for them is when we recognize their differences and we parent from a place of being equitable rather than equal.
Right.
And so in all these areas we're going to talk about, keep that in mind. What would be equitable versus making everything exactly equal? In an article called Playing Favorites Can Wreak Havoc in a Step Family, expert Ron Deal reveals 4 areas where blended families tend to struggle with favoritism. And again, it's about the kids' perception more than our intention. So let's talk about some ways to avoid that. The first area is around gift giving.
Oh, yeah. That can be a big one.
It can be. And gift giving, it's not just from you, but it's also from others in the blended family or in the extended family that can be really challenging. You don't necessarily have to spend the exact same amount of money on each child for birthdays or special occasions. This is where we get into equitable versus equal. How much you're going to spend could be influenced by the age of the child or their interests or their developmental maturity, all of those kinds of things. Like we spent a lot more on Annika when she was a bit older and the kids were way younger, and they would have been happy with the box that the gift came in more so than the gift itself. So they didn't require a ton of money to be spent on them.
Yeah, you've got one child that's into Play-Doh and one that's into expensive electronics.
Yeah, those are 2 different things.
But both their needs are being met.
Yeah, exactly. And at an age appropriately.
Right.
So there's all these things that we think about. It's regardless of the dollar amount, you can still be equitable in your giving when you consider the different needs, desires, hopes, and dynamics for each of the kids. I said earlier that, it's about our unique circumstances, but it's also about the heartstrings that are attached to those unique circumstances. And so if you're really honest in your heart that you want to treat all the kids from an equitable standpoint.
And fairness.
Then over time, it's really going to all balance out because you're not overtly favoring one child over another.
Right.
So it's a circumstance issue and it's a heart issue. And if necessary, you may have to talk to extended family members.
Right.
We've heard some stories where, even a couple, 2-3 years into the journey, there are grandparents who are still only buying for their bio grandkids and virtually ignore the step grandkids. And that can be really, really painful. And you might have to stand up. This is a hard conversation, but to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, look, these stepkids, Joey and Jane, or whatever, they are my kids now.
Yeah.
And if you're going to acknowledge the other kids, I need you to acknowledge them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of a young man that was friends with our son, and his dad was remarrying a woman with a child his age. And I just, was hanging out with him one day, and I said, "Hey, how you feeling about your dad remarrying? And what are your biggest concerns?"
Yeah.
And first thing, right on the top of his head was, "Well, I really hope that her parents buy me gifts at Christmas just like they do their own grandchild."
It was like the first thing on his list.
Oh, my goodness. And
So
he went into
interesting.
great detail
Yeah.
about how he was hoping that they acknowledged him in that way.
He wanted to feel a part of the family,
Right.
even from the extented family members, from
and-
his stepmom.
Yeah, and I suspect that gifts are probably his love language.
I would bet,
'cause he
yeah.
talked a lot about
Yep.
it, but that was really important to him. And
Yeah.
that's a 16-year-old teenage boy.
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of shocked that it was the first thing out of his mouth was to be acknowledged by the grandparents on
Totally.
his new stepmother's side.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we want to be equitable in this area of gift giving. Where else do we want to be equitable?
Well, another area where we can run into problems is around how we prioritize our time.
Yeah.
So one-on-one time between bio parents and their kids is so important. We know that. However, it should also be balanced with focus time for everyone in the family. You need to be able to communicate your commitment to your kids and your stepkids, both.
Yep.
So you may need to make some adjustments to your schedule and look for opportunities to make a personal connection with every child in your step family, even if it's something small.
Yeah.
And, this also includes showing up at their events.
Right.
If you're only
Yeah.
showing up to your bio kids events and you're not going to your step kids, games or recitals, that they're going to notice that.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we're spending time with both.
Yeah, and sometimes this can be challenging in this area where maybe we've got one set of kids who's full-time in the house and then another set who's only coming in every other weekend.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out what equitable looks like in that, because the time that we even have access to the kids is highly inequitable.
Yeah.
And so it's those opportunities to say, oh yeah, on these weekends, maybe we're going to have some really focused time. Somehow we're going to help them feel included in the overall picture of things. And maybe even try to get the other step siblings involved if they're all getting along okay and those kinds of things. But there's several areas that really challenge this one, aren't there?
Yeah. Another one is if you have a child in your home that's really high needs, whether that's physical, emotional, mental, whatever, they're struggling.
Yeah.
And now all your focus is on that child or that set of kids regarding, if they're struggling in the other home and having problems.
Yeah.
And the other kids kind of feel like, they're kind of left with the scraps of your attention. And we struggled with that too during our season of parental alienation, when we were so focused on Annika and the court battle and everything we had going on, that our two mutual kids kind of slid under the radar for a while. And I think they really felt that.
Well, we know that. I mean, I remember having conversations with, I remember a very specific conversation with Jacob where we were remembering that season. And
Later,
way down the road, he was, I don't know, maybe 14, 15. And we were just recalling some of those experiences. And I remember him sharing with me, he was like, Dad, I really got it. I understood that Annika needed help. He goes, but I did feel like, we were kind of left in the dust for a while.
Yeah, they were like 7 and 8 at the time we went through that.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but in some ways we pulled away from them. I mean, we didn't neglect them, but we definitely weren't as available emotionally or with our energy or our time as we were in other seasons of life.
And this is challenging because you only have so much time and energy. And when you have a child that's in crisis or in need, of course you're going to jump in and do everything you can to support that child or protect that child or do whatever you need to do. But I think, there's no easy answer to this, but I think one thing you can do is take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
Self-care, so that you're not burning out, you're not, you're having exhaustion where you don't have time and energy for anyone else. I don't think I managed that as well as I could have.
Yeah.
during that tough season.
I totally agree, because the more self-care you have, the more energy you have to go around to be equitable
you can't
rather
give
than
what
equal.
you don't have.
Yeah. And at the same time, while you're doing that self-care, I remember having some very specific times. Okay, I've got to make Phoebe a priority for just an hour this week. And I would find a way to go make an hour, at least in that week, just to spend focused time with her. And then, maybe the next week I would do the same with Jacob. It wasn't equal. Yeah. But it was as close to equitable as I could get it.
I think there are sometimes circumstances where you need to compartmentalize things in your own mind. You have to put some things aside for, like you said, even an hour, just so that you can make sure that all the kids are getting some attention and getting their needs met. And you're not just focused on that high need child, because it's so easy to get there.
Absolutely. But again, we're looking for being equitable, not necessarily equal. And equitable says, you're a priority. You're important to me. And I love you and I want to be in relationship with you. It doesn't take hours and hours and hours and hours to say that.
Yeah.
You can do that in very unique ways. Yeah. Okay. What's another area, another blind spot that we can run into?
Well, this one we hear about all the time from couples, and that's around disciplining or extending leniency to kids, right? We want to strive to be objective and fair when it comes to this. So you'll need to discuss together and agree how behavioral issues in your home are going to be handled so that the disciplinary decisions are balanced and consistent for all the kids.
Sure.
And you also want to be careful about positioning your parental authority. If you haven't learned about this is so important, because that's a common challenge for step couples. Who is going to be disciplining what kids? And we'll go ahead and put a link to a podcast episode that you can learn more about that if you need to. But there are some areas where we can really be challenged around disciplining. And one is if we've got a paralyzed parent.
What does that mean?
Well, we know this all too well because we struggled with this one too. But this is when a bio parent, maybe they're dealing with their own feelings of guilt or fear. Maybe they only have their kids part-time, very limited. And so when their kids come, they want that time to be fun and happy. So they don't want to have to correct or discipline. And then when the child does do something wrong, they're just paralyzed. They can't act because, oh my goodness, my fears, my guilt, and I want this to be fun, whatever it is triggered.
So I don't hold them accountable.
Exactly.
I'm paralyzed in that moment when I should be having some kind of discipline or an accountability because of all the emotions that are tied up in the past.
So you're letting poor behavior go. But in a complex blended family, this can be really difficult, because if you've got another set of kids that are being held accountable, and there's an expectation of behavior for them, they're required to do all these things, but then this other child that comes into the home isn't, or is
not being held accountable in the same way.
Giving leniency, they don't have to get disciplined when they come. That speaks huge to
now we're
to
actually
the kids.
Feeding the perception of favoritism. And we're feeding jealousy. We're feeding probably conflict between the two sets of kids. It is really challenging, but it can be simplified. It's not always easy, but it can be simplified. One of the things that we've noticed in this area, I think, is how often it's easy to jump to the rules of the home. Right. When we get married and, okay, you've got your kids and I've got mine, and we have different ideas.
Problems.
So let's start making the list of house rules. And we end up making that list, and then we're like, oh, we forgot one. And then another one gets out. Oh, yeah, there's that other one as well. And then
it's like a mile
next
long.
thing we know, when it's time to talk to the kids about the list of rules, it's like rolling the scroll out. And no one can keep track of, well, wait, what did we say we were going to do?
And the bio parent can't enforce it because they're overwhelmed as well with all the rules. And it's so detailed and nitpicky.
So when it comes to curbing favoritism, around disciplining, we actually suggest to chuck out the rules. You're going like, wait, what? What do you mean chuck out the rules? So instead of that big, long list of rules, what we want to help couples get to is what we would call a code of conduct. That's where we get above the rules and we really start focusing on the values and what we call desired destinations. And not only is that how we want to live within our home now, but it's actually the kinds of things we want to instill in the character of our kids for the future.
Right.
And we have an online workshop that talks about that. And we talk about that a lot.
All the time.
Because it's so central to curbing this favoritism thing. Because once we get above the rules and we start talking about those values and what we're building our home on,
how we're going to treat each
now
other.
we can point behavior to that all the time, good behavior and bad behavior. And it creates a manageable, simple standard that everyone can live by and we can hold everybody to. And it actually at that point doesn't matter whether they're there full time or whether they're just coming every other weekend. We can still hold that standard in a much simpler, easier way.
Yeah, the expectations are set across the board.
Exactly. And now we're not showing favoritism. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you're absolutely welcome to maybe give us a call. We can set up a free coaching call and help kind of walk you through that and talk about the different ways that we approach that.
Yeah,
and we'll put a link.
Huge difference.
We'll put a link in the show notes for you to schedule that call. You know, we've talked about focusing on being equitable rather than equal in some different areas, in gift giving, in prioritizing your time, in disciplining. And the fourth blind spot that often comes up is around related to discipline, but it's around chores and responsibilities. Okay. We've got to be careful about burdening some children with chores and responsibilities that's much greater than others, right? We've got to make the expectations clear to all the kids and then follow through when those responsibilities aren't met. And even kids who are only in the home part-time, they need to learn life skills. They need to learn responsibility. So everyone should be given some sort of age-appropriate chores or responsibilities within the household from our perspective.
Right.
If we want to teach kids about their responsibilities later in life, then we've got to kind of replicate that in our home now. But it can be really challenging to make this one equitable, especially when it comes to those various amounts of time. Right? So we've got to think through, you know, often we'll have the kids who are only there part-time, especially if it's limited part-time. And we maybe don't want to give them any chores because we don't want their weekend to be just filled with chores.
We want to have fun.
But rather than going all the way to that extreme, maybe we can find one or two things that take 15 minutes that they can be responsible for every weekend that they're there.
You want them to contribute to the household and to have that sense of ownership. And if there's another set of kids that are there more who are doing lots of chores every day, you want them to also see that, oh, those kids are also contributing
as well.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's definitely a challenge, this various amounts of time. You need to be able to talk about that openly as a couple. You know, like we said earlier, one of the keys to curbing favoritism is that open communication between the two of you. And it's not easy. It's challenging communication. But, you know, other things that, you know, being age appropriate, right? We've had our kids doing chores and responsibilities at some level from a pretty early age. But was it always equal? No, because Annika was 7 years older than the littles, right? And so she had a different type of responsibility than what the younger kids
I do
had.
remember her asking once, you know, how come I have to do all these chores and all they have to do is pick up their toys? Whoop. And I said, well, you know, that's a good question. And when they're your age, they will be doing these chores and you'll be, you know, doing something else.
They're like 3 and 2 and she's like 10, right? Well, we're not really going to have the little ones doing the same type of stuff. So this area of chores and responsibilities, it can be challenged in lots of ways. But again, thinking in terms of being equitable, not necessarily equal, that can really make it easier for you as parents and step-parents. And it can start to change that perception that the kids might be having if there's some concern about favoritism.
Yeah, another area where couples can tend to get tripped up a little bit on this one is one parent believes that kids should be mowing the lawn, washing the car, having lots and lots of responsibilities, and the other parent just doesn't see it that way. It feels like, oh, it's their childhood. They shouldn't be burdened with a whole bunch of chores. They should be out playing and frolicking. And so that's another reason why you want to have that conversation around what are your values? What are the life skills that you want to teach your kids? What are the character traits you want them to learn? So that goes back to that code of conduct. And that's an important conversation for couples to have.
You said all of that with a lot of authority, as if we had some experience in that area.
Oh, yes.
We definitely had challenges there. I was I was greatly, I'll say, more motivated than you were to figure out chores and give responsibilities, where you wanted to really just let the kids play. And I think you just used the word frolic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but now I see the value in them having responsibilities, because now they pretty much clean the house and it's great.
Oh, so now you're benefiting from it. Yeah.
Well, and their roommate and their future spouse will also benefit because they've got skills.
Yes. But we've had to do that in equitable ways along the way.
Right. Exactly.
This is not an easy topic, right? The complex dynamics of blended families really leads to certain vulnerabilities. And favoritism is one vulnerability. It's one blind spot that all of us tend to face. And if it's not checked, if it's not examined and thought through, it can really wreak havoc and cause a lot of pain. In fact, it can cause some lasting pain. And especially in those step-sibling relationships.
Absolutely.
It can create division and challenge.
And resentment.
And so figuring this out early on, or as early as you possibly can, is great. If maybe you've seen some of these traps in the past, it's not too late. You're not just victim. You don't have to just stay stuck there. You can do something new. And the first step really is just to find a way to talk openly as a couple. And even if it's hard for you to admit that you've got a bit of a favorite, that you kind of really, you just love that sweet little smile of that little guy.
Or they're just easier to be around.
Yeah, you've got the same interests as your little girl. Whatever that is, just admitting that to your partner and getting them up and out and beginning a conversation can be really freeing. You know, the different feelings that you may have for each of the children doesn't mean that those feelings are about better or worse.
Or even less or more.
Exactly. It just means that those emotions you're experiencing are different between the children. And that's okay.
It is.
But it's not an excuse to allow favoritism to emerge in your blended family. If you're just not sure how to talk to your partner about that, you can reach out to us and we can talk and brainstorm about that. Again, we'll have a link in the show notes to schedule your free coaching call.
We're good mediators, we've been told.
Yes. We can help you have that conversation together. But you've got to make the choice. It starts with a choice to say, okay, we're going to find a way to communicate with each other and start to make wise decisions that are equitable for everyone in the family. Even if we can't always reach equality, we're going to shoot for that equitable.
You've got to be willing to admit that maybe I have some blind spots that need to be examined, and maybe I need to check my heart when it comes to how I treat this child or that child.
That's right.
So be willing to do that.
Examine the circumstances and check your heart, and then communicate about what you're learning.
And not only will your kids benefit, but your relationship will also benefit, because if your spouse sees that you're favoring your kids over their kids, that's definitely going to cause some conflict in your marriage.
Absolutely. Well, it's a tough topic, but it's one that's so necessary and needs to be talked about. And so we just encourage you to go have your conversation, but that's going to make this episode a wrap.
Until next time.